Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Confident Izuku bumps into Momo Yaoyorozu on his way to UA and had Armor Quirk, part 1. So before we start, please go check out the author of this fanfic, LeviathansMight, link is in the description. Also subscribe to our channel and like this video, so let's begin the video. Izuku. His mother yelled for him from the kitchen of their apartment. You're going to be late. Hurry up. She yelled again as she heard a thump and a grunt coming from her son's room just adjacent to the kitchen. Thanks mom. She heard her son yelling from the room and she chuckled. The boy in question ran around grabbing his new uniform and throwing it on minus the jacket and tie before grabbing his bag, headphones and his electric longboard and bolted out of his room. He immediately went to the table slamming the food quickly and kissing his mom goodbye. Thanks for the food mom. I'll be home after school. He called back, his green hair flapping in the wind. When he got to the street, he hopped on the electric longboard and started to head to the train station. He managed to get his headphones on and start up his music, listening to Regular Everyday Normal Motherfucker by Harry Potter. He finally got to the train and was about to miss it when someone kept the doors from closing on him, and he ran in and looked at the person who had saved him from being late. Instantly, he could tell that she was from some kind of solid economic background, prim and proper, someone that he probably wouldn't get along with if she was in his class. She was wearing a UA uniform and he smiled at her. Thanks, I thought I was going to be screwed because I was a few minutes late waking up. No problem. She said in a voice that instantly caught his attention. A troublemaker who's from somewhere well off. Interesting. I'm Momo Yaoyorozu, class 1 at UA. She said, presenting her hand in front of her to shake his hand. Izuku Midoriya, class 1 at UA. He said, shaking the hand that she had offered. You don't look like you should be taking the train, more like a limo would be in a limo or something. He commented as he scanned her up and down. She was notably attractive with long raven black hair, onyx eyes, and a very attractive face. That wasn't even counting the rest of her assets that were pleasurable on the eyes. My parents wanted me to, but I told them that I didn't want to be treated differently than anyone else in the class. She shrugged and smiled lightly at him as she scanned him. He was rather muscular, not overly so, but just right to be at the peak attractiveness. His hair was messy, but it was like a disorganized mess. His face was rather cute, almost as if he were a few years younger. He had on a stone-like pendant around his neck in the shape of a sword that she took notice of and instinctively reached out and touched it, which surprised him. The train suddenly stopped and the two almost collided if Midoriya hadn't grabbed the handrail and wrapped an arm around her waist, resulting in the two being closer than anyone but a couple should be. Hey, looks like you're falling for me already, huh? He laughed a bit when her face went red, but she leaned up and whispered in his ear. Maybe I am. She breathed out before walking out of the train, and Izuku rushed after her with a slightly red face. Yep, we're gonna get along well. He thought to himself as he got in step with her quickly and smiled before hopping on the electric longboard and keeping pace with her with the controller. That's so unfair. She laughed and tried to push him, but he regained his balance too quickly as he laughed. Put these on, we'll be having a quirk analysis exam. Be there in 5 minutes. Their homeroom teacher Shota, as always, said, and left them to put on the uniforms. Izuku managed to get changed extremely quickly and was out there before annoying, but closely followed by Momo. Man, if you weren't in the same class as me, I swear I would think you were following me. Midoriya laughed, looking at the girl in front of him, towering over her by a few inches. Man, if you weren't in the same class as me, I swear I would think you were a pervert. She smiled, laughed before grabbing his chin and lifting it upwards so that his eyes met hers. My eyes are up here, dork. She said with a confident smirk that left him stunned, as he didn't think that she was going to fire back like that. He laughed and was about to say something when he heard a growl coming from behind him. Instantly, the boy whirled around and glared at the blonde behind him. God damn it, Deku. You were supposed to go fuck off. The boy said, letting some explosions off in his hands, looking like a rabid Pomeranian than anything else. Bitsuki fucking Bakugo. He glared at the identified boy, who glared right back and walked close enough to almost make their noses touch. Midoriya suddenly had brass knuckles and was swinging at the boy, surprising Momo, as she thought that he didn't look like someone to start a fight. However, the way they spoke to each showed that there was some hidden history between the two. She jumped back when the explosion stopped and weapons stopped existing, and the two boys were wrapped up in Izawa's capture cloth as he sent them both a seething glare, daring one of them to say something stupid. Instead, Izuku instantly calmed down and looked towards Momo, not saying anything, but she could see the anger in his eyes. What the hell was that? Izawa growled at them before looking towards Momo and the rest of the class, as they all had witnessed what happened. Izawa shifted his gaze towards a boy with blue hair and glasses. What happened to Iida? Well, they both said each other's names or nicknames that they have for each other, and instantly they had each thrown the punches that you had stopped. He explained shortly, looking at his teacher, who looked at them with something like annoyance. They are Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. They seemed to glare at each other when they saw each other in class earlier, sir. Iida wasn't wrong. They had glared at each other before Midoriya ripped his gaze away from his enemy and talked to Momo. Both of you, stop this childish bullshit. Now since Midoriya took first, he'll be the first to do the softball throw. He growled, but released them, but the information was surprising some of the people who were in Bakugo's block in the practical, and he had set a record with about 96 points just for fighting the villains and had no rescue points. How had this green-haired boy managed to beat that? For those who are wondering how he beat Bakugo, watch. He said simply, as he winked at Momo, who just rolled her eyes wanting him to hurry up so they could get this done. Suddenly, there was a cannon there that was slightly bigger than any that she had been able to create. Everyone gasped and looked at the winded Midoriya. He wasn't worse for wear, but he definitely would need a few minutes to get his strength back. He shot the softball out of the cannon, and Aizawa held up a phone with a distance, 1,000 meters. The cannon disappeared, and Midoriya shook himself lightly before grabbing his water and drained half of it. Now see, he has a quirk that normally would be difficult to use in a manner like this. But with his creativity he was able to use his weapons master quirk to be able to send that softball flying. To give him a break, we'll start with this. Then move on. This looks like fun. A pink-skinned girl whispered to the boy who had bright red hair, and he nodded. Fun? Aizawa said, smirking, and looked around at his group before smiling evilly. Fine, if you're last then you're expelled. He had a hard look before having everyone go. Throughout the entire thing, Midoriya had been in the top 5 of the students, with Momo being right behind him. At the end, some students had their hands on their knees and were exhausted, while some were standing just breathing a bit heavily. Congratulations, all of you are staying. He said with a smirk before explaining that the threat of expulsion was a logical ruse to get them all to do their best and be creative with their quirks. They all groaned at that knowledge, but accepted it, as UA was known for letting their teachers have as much creative freedom as they wished. They all left and showered before going back to their class, as it was the first day they would just be getting the syllabus, then whatever time they have would be their own. Bakugo had lost again to Midoriya, and this time he had also lost to Momo. Seething, he glared at them and was about to say something, but a warning look from Aizawa made him rethink what he was going to say, settling with a growl and stalking off. However, first was lunch, and Midoriya looked forward to that. He sat down with an American-style burger and took a bite as he scrolled through his phone to find a song that he wanted to listen to as he put on his headphones. As he found the song, Golden Touch by Jackson Gamble, he saw a few of his classmates approaching him. He waved at them, and they all smiled as they came to sit by him. Iida, Uraraka, and Momo had all come over to sit with him, and he smiled at them. "Sup guys?" he said and moved over as Momo sat next to him, as Iida and Uraraka sat across from him and Momo respectively. That wasn't stressful at all, huh? He laughed and shook his head as they all laughed with him. "I must commemorate you, Midoriya. I never thought that your quirk would be that difficult to use apparently. But then again, I don't have it," Iida said in a formal voice, looking at him with some respect. "Trust me, it's not easy. It's called Weapons Master. I have the ability to create any weapon out of my own stamina. I am limited by my knowledge of the weapon, so I have to study weaponry to actually know how to create something. AKA I need to know the parts that are used in weapons. The more complex or bigger something is, the more it takes out of me," he says, demonstrating pulling out a knife which he used to cut his burger in half. Letting the knife disappear, he made a sword which looked like an old American cavalry saber which he let disappear. "Unlike Momo here," he said, poking the said girl in the side as she rolled her eyes, shoving him lightly as he chuckled. "Nothing I create stays, as it uses up my stamina and energy. I'm working on creating something that will let me retain it, but it's a technique I'll have to study more. It's kinda like a domain that enhances you," he says, sighing at the long-winded speech and digging into his food as the others mull over his words. "Sounds like you've spent countless hours working on this," Iida said as Midoriya nodded. "I was bullied as a kid for having a quirk that only summoned weapons. I was called a heathen, warmonger, and other shit, but I worked since I was a kid to find a way to make myself into a hero," he said with a fierce determination in his eyes, and Momo bumped shoulders with him and smiled. "Well, I think you're a great hero," she said before leaning in. "You did catch me this morning," she whispered, causing him to choke on his water, and Iida freaked out wondering what happened as he and Uraraka had been having a different conversation. "Why do you think UA wanted us in dorms? They didn't implement it until this year, so I think it was something that they have been working on for a while. Probably because it would be easier to keep an eye on us. I knew Nezu before UA just from an accidental run-in, and the guy always seems to have a plan. Which is for some reason terrifying even if he is a good guy. Midoriya said, shuddering and rubbing the back of his neck. I really hope that they got everything in my room right. He muttered, and Momo nodded thinking the same thing. She didn't know how big it was, so she was just hoping that everything would fit inside. Well, we have hero basics, then we can go there, since we'll be living there for the next 3 years. He laughed, knowing that everyone was gonna be closer or they were going to kill each other. Yeah, it should be fun. Maybe we could have an event of some sort for everyone to get to know each other better. Iida said, pondering the option with his hand on his chin before the bell rang, and they all left to go get to class. When they arrived there, no one was there, and so they were just waiting there for whoever was going to teach it. I am here. Entering the door like a normal person. They heard, and the door opened quickly, and All Might was standing there. Everyone was happy to see him. They had no idea that All Might was going to be teaching them. They thought that those were just the rumors of the upperclassmen just to get them excited for something that wasn't going to happen. However, they were proven wrong when the number 1 hero stepped into their class and pressed a button on the remote control. Faces with numbers were revealed. All Might explained that those were going to be their hero costumes and that they would be having combat training today. When they went to the changing rooms, Midoriya pulled his costume out and smiled. It was a metallic gray suit. It had multiple dark green belts all over full of hero supplies that he couldn't make, and in place of a knife holster was a flashlight. And basically Jackal's suit, but dark green instead of orange, same with the eyes. Whoa dude, that looks insane. Kirishima called, fully dressed, as his costume didn't take very long to get on. Thanks man, I designed it to overcome the fact that I can't create anything but weapons. Momo really has a full bag of tricks compared to me. He laughed, shaking his head slightly jealous of the creation quirk user. First name basis, The redhead questioned and looked at Midoriya with a sharky grin. Midoriya turned red and started to answer before glancing over Kirishima's shoulder. Mineta was inspecting a poster, but shrugged, as if it was nothing. The two boys were suspicious, but didn't say anything, as the perverted great didn't do anything yet. They walked out to the gym and waited for the girls to get there, and Midoriya was showing off his suit, holding his helmet under his arm, as it was quite hot. Next time, he was sure to put in a request for the suit to just be a bit more breathable. The doors opened to the gym, and the girls walked in. Midoriya thought that all the costumes were fitting before looking at Momo, and his mouth dropped lightly. She noticed this and walked up to him. Using one finger she closed his mouth. Take a picture, I want to be a hero but I look like an assassin. It'll last longer. She giggled and walked away, dragging a hand across his face. This left him with his mouth open and staring after her, leaving Kirishima and Kaminari laughing like goons. Can I ask her to marry me? He asked no one in particular, making the two laugh even harder than before. Alright everyone, gather round. All Might yelled and brought everyone to hit and finally shocked Midoriya back into reality. He shook his head and went to stand between Kirishima and Kaminari, listening to All Might as he explained the drill. When the teams were announced he smiled and looked over at Momo, who rolled her eyes, but Midoriya made a heart with his hands, mouthing that she loved him, causing her to roll her eyes again. When the opponents were announced he was happy and sad because he had to go against Iida, who was his best friend, and Bakugo. He finally had the opportunity to finish what happened this morning. He flashed a smile in the explosive boy's direction and cracked his knuckles. Alright. Team A, Midoriya and Yaoyorozu, goes against Team D, Bakugo and Iida. Team D are villains, and A is heroes. Good luck to both teams. 15 minutes to prepare for the villains. Starting now. He said, as everyone else, but the mentioned four left to go to the observation area. The two boys went into the building, Bakugo glaring at him the entire time, before they weren't able to see the other team. Man, you two hate each other. Momo said offhandedly, as he nodded, not even bothering to hide it anymore. He bullied me for the longest time. I was a kid, how the hell was I supposed to have stamina to summon a fucking cannon when I could barely get a knife? It started to get better when I started to work out all the time and work on it, but still, you know. It's frustrating. He said admittedly, letting some of his anger seep through, and Momo saw that he was letting her see some personal stuff that he didn't share with just anyone. I don't know, but I see how you would get frustrated with it. She said, and rested a hand on his shoulder before moving it to his chin and forcing him to look at her. But now you're here, you're proving him wrong, and you're doing better than he ever could. Plus you have a rather hot girl right next to you, willing to kick his ass. She smiled as he laughed his normal confident personality back. Well, what's the plan? I saw you analyzing everyone's quirks and writing it down, you nerd. She asked as he smirked, and instantly they got to work. After 15 minutes they had a plan. Bakugo was gonna head straight for Midoriya and she would slip away. Midoriya would destroy him quickly and Momo would get ready for them to reach the bomb. They nodded at each other as Midoriya put on his helmet, then created a riot shield that hid the sword and handgun that he had in hidden holsters that no one but him and someone behind him would see. As soon as they stepped on the second floor, they heard explosions coming towards them. Momo hid while he braced himself and was right in doing so. The blonde boy slammed into the shield, jarring Midoriya's arms so that he dropped it but was able to react and grab the sword and gun, letting the shield dissolve as he would need most of his concentration. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Momo slip away up the stairs to the third floor and he was glad it worked as his arms fucking hurt. Temper tantrum. He mocked Bakugo as he stood up tall again, aware that the two were matched in height and possibly even firepower. Fucking weapon crazy bastard. Bakugo growled, glaring at him. Before the two clashed, they stood there willing the other to make a move before they acted at the same time. Bakugo swung a powerful right hook at him, but he ducked and swung the blunted sword, slamming into the boy's ribs, eliciting a cry of pain. They stepped back with Midoriya smirking that he had won that battle. Bakugo growled and approached the same way, but instead of throwing a punch, he let off an explosion that blinded Midoriya with smoke before unleashing multiple explosions on his back. The green-haired boy grunted in pain but swiveled to glare at Bakugo, whose gauntlet blinked a red light, causing the boy to smirk. Young Bakugo? Do not use that. Doing so will cause massive destruction and could kill him. All Might yelled through the mix, sounding somewhat panicked by what was happening. Midoriya was instantly looking for doors to hide in and seeing none was left with one option: stopping the explosion somehow. Letting the sword dissolve, he used two hands to aim the gun and shot before the boy pulled the pin, lodging a rubber bullet in the exit of the gauntlet, causing an explosion that blew both of them back but left Bakugo unconscious through a wall. Midoriya looked at him and sighed, all of his previous anger and hatred gone, all that was left was a pit of sadness that didn't want to leave. Midoriya wasn't much better, his mask was gone and he was bloodied and limping, but he made it to the bomb room. Momo looked at him like she saw a zombie before shaking her head and pointed to Iida, who had removed everything from the room. He nodded and was about to move, but Momo stopped him, creating some flashbangs, and Midoriya smiled as they threw them in. Hearing Iida yell, they knew they hit. Momo was up and running towards the bomb, while Midoriya was focusing on keeping Iida away with round after round of rubber bullets. Finally, she was able to touch it, and at the end of the round, instantly medical boats came for Bakugo and Midoriya. Iida nodded at the two, knowing he had been outplayed partially due to a bad teammate and for him not accounting for other factors. When the bots finally got to Midoriya, Momo helped him onto it as he groaned but stopped when Momo kissed his cheek. "Good job, you weapon crazy dork." He looked at her with shock before pulling her onto the gurney with him and she yelped, slightly glaring at him before she realized he fell unconscious. She sighed and shook her head as she ran her fingers through his hair, wondering what happened to leave him beat up like this. Midoriya groaned as he woke up feeling like he had a migraine and rolled over so that his face was down. His arms were around something, he managed to think before realizing it was someone. He shot up looking at the now blushing Momo, whose thighs he had been using as a pillow. He started to stutter but stopped, seeing her blush get worse as he looked down. He was only in his athletic shorts, showing his rather amazing physique for someone his age, and he blushed a red almost equivalent to a fire hydrant. "Sup, Momo?" he said with none of the earlier confidence he had and was still blushing insanely bad. "So, you kissed my cheek?" he said, trying to get them to think about what happened even though neither of them had minded. It was just awkward as it was the first day they knew each other. Granted, they fit rather well together, Momo the rebellious rich girl and Midoriya, a troublemaking boy who didn't have much growing up. "Yay, I did. Did you like it?" she asked him, blushing at the question as he rubbed his neck before laying back down and using her thighs as pillows again. "Answer the question, you weapon-loving dork," she said as he had just laid there acting like it was something that was completely normal. He laughed for a second, wincing as his headache came back but looked up at her. "Of course, I did. It's not every day I meet a super hot chick who happens to have a rebellious streak and can dish out as much flirting as I can," he says back, closing his eyes before standing and offering his hand up. Ignoring her blush, he smiles when she puts her hand in his. "Come on, let's go watch the others," he said, not letting go of her hand and almost pulling her into his side, which she found rather comfy. She had put his costume away and was glad that he had shorts underneath, otherwise this was going to be even more embarrassing than it already was. She rested her head on his shoulder when they got back to the room, seeing that there were now chairs in the area. They sat down next to each other and relaxed. Their battle easily took the longest. Todoroki managed to freeze the entire building in one move and had the quickest time, but was scolded for not thinking about the weapon that could have been activated anyway if the others were able to move. Izuku snorted at it, drawing attention to himself again. Some faces were full of relief, while others had hints of annoyance. "What's so funny about Midoriya?" Todoroki asked scathingly, glaring down at the green-haired student. "You." He answered simply. Everyone looked at him, so he sighed and answered fully. "You can't be number one without your full power. Hell, I'd rather have Bakugo become number one before someone who doesn't give their full effort into everything that they are trying to accomplish. It's lazy and conceited. What happens if someone with all might strength came out and at you? What are you going to just freeze them and not capitalize on it?" He finished saying his piece, clearly annoyed with how he was feeling that some of the other students decided to avoid him for the rest of the day. Kirishima, Kaminari, Iida, and Momo being the exceptions. Even Uraraka was keeping her distance from him for some reason. "You know, you didn't have to be so blunt about it," Momo said while they were walking back to the locker rooms. "Yay, but it was needed because look at how much he is thinking about it now. Someone will probably have to say something more, but we'll never know until it happens." He shrugged as he left her to get his uniform from his locker before focusing on Mineta, who was doing something at the wall. "Oi, grapehead, what in the fuck are you doing?" he said, walking over as Mineta turned around, causing Midoriya to take a step back at all the drools. "It's a peephole to the girls' room. Our upperclassmen have given us an amazing gift," he claimed and yelled, going back to it before Midoriya punted him out of the way. "Todoroki, can you freeze the hole? Shoji, can you grab Cementos to fill it in?" he asked, glaring at the rapist, standing in front of the hole, unaware that all the girls were listening in. "I'm not in the greatest mood because of Sparky, but I'm willing to put that difference aside to fuck this guy up," he growled, creating a bat that he flipped like he used it every day as Bakugo punched his fist with explosions. "I hate this freak, but I'll make this exception once, Deku," Bakugo growled as the hole was covered and Shoji left to get Cementos. All of a sudden, loud explosions and crashes were heard in both locker rooms, then out in the hall. "Ready, Deku?" They heard Bakugo yell and rushed into the hall, finding all the guys already in the hall watching as Bakugo used an explosion to pitch Mineta towards Midoriya. The loud crack was heard as the bat broke and Mineta was seen flying out the window, and Midoriya whistled. "Could have been better," he muttered, turning around to see everyone there, Momo looking like she was going to die from laughter. "Fucking Deku, your quirk is fucking weapons, shoulda have a better hit," Bakugo grumbled, but fist bumped Midoriya as he walked to the dorms. If there was anything he hated more than Deku, it was perverts like Mineta. "Shut the fuck up, Kitsuki," he growled before leaning on the wall, forgetting just how much of his stamina he had used during the earlier fight. Instantly, Momo was by his side. Sadly, he was fully dressed, but she could still feel the muscles underneath his uniform. "Okay, Babe Ruth, don't die here. We'll get you to the dorms so you can sleep," she chuckled as he just nodded, his eyes almost fully closed before grabbing his water bottle and slamming the entire thing. He sighed in relief, even if it was just for a moment, but stood with her help and the two walked away to the dorms. 1,000 yen says that they will get together by the end of the week, Mina said as she and the rest of the class walked behind them as they heard talking coming from the oblivious pair. "I'm not taking that bet," Iida said suddenly as he took a drink from his orange juice as they walked back. "You didn't see what happened after the battle, and I refuse to tell you until they do," he said simply, leaving the group with the thought of what the hell actually happened. When everyone got to the dorms, they stared up at the gigantic building that they would be living in for the rest of their high school years. Midoriya looked up at it with a surprised expression, not used to having a big place to call home, while Momo looked unimpressed, which Midoriya caught. "I was right, you are a rich girl," he teased, poking her in the side, causing her to yelp and glare at him before nodding. "I didn't ask for it," she muttered, clearly not wanting to talk about it, causing him to look at her weirdly before bumping her shoulder lightly. "It's fine." He pauses for a second before gaining a flirtatious smirk and leaning in as they lead everyone into the dorms as they had been introduced earlier in the week to the dorms. "Gorgeous." He smiled, seeing her jump as he laughed and went to his room, which just happened to be on the same floor that she was. "It was like we were destined," he called after her, making glare down at him. "You need to fuck off," she called, surprisingly using vulgar language, which despite his teasing he didn't expect. He stared at her as she walked before Kaminari clamped his hand on his shoulder, shocking him back to reality. "Oh shit, what's up, Kaminari?" he said as they walked into his dorm. The electric boy had already changed into a tank top and comfortable shorts. Midoriya changes while Kaminari talks to him and laughs with the boy, shaking his head, changing into a tight green t-shirt and black basketball shorts. "So what's going on, Mr. Swordman? First, longboard cruise. And second, you and Yaoyorozu already seem pretty close, and it's the first day," he says, checking out Midoriya's longboards as he got ready to get going on the cruise. He had his longboard with lightning diesels with him, Midoriya finally noticed, while Midoriya grabbed his that was just a wood design and they started to walk down. "Well, nothing much, clearly." Definitely, haven't gone for a cruise in a hot minute. And I guess, we met on the train after she held the door open for me and the train stopped suddenly, she almost fell, and I caught her. He said simply, as Kirishima was waiting for them with his own board and waved at them as they went outside for a few hours. That's a dude, she's pretty hot, so good on you. Kaminari said, as Kirishima rolled his eyes at his new friend's antics. Sporting black shorts and a red muscle shirt, he stretched and got off his chair. Jesus dude, you couldn't even give him 10 minutes since we've been back. He laughed and shook his head, but they went to leave anyway. When they got back they were laughing like they knew each other for years. Kaminari, you fucking idiot. Midoriya laughed as Kaminari laughed with him, electricity coming off him in spurts as they had just been around the campus but were rather sweaty as it had started to heat up already. They finally got in and set their boards together so they could go again whenever they wanted without having to run and grab it. They entered and went to the kitchen so that they could cook something for themselves as they had missed dinner, but Midoriya took over when he saw that they couldn't even operate the oven. I'm not cooking for you two all the time, but I'll make an exception. Unknown to him, Momo, Jiru and Mina had been sitting in the common room and all of them sported blushes as they caught the three boys coming in. So dibs on Izuku. Momo said, suddenly catching the girls off guard as Jiru was looking at Kaminari and Mina at Kirishima. The girls looked at each other before giggling at Momo's flustered face, despite being able to flirt back with him and seeing him bare-chested, a shirt sticking to him felt different to her for some reason. Someone likes the little warlord, does she? Mina giggled and poked fun at her friend, causing Momo to shake her head quickly as she buried her face in her hands. She just shut up. She finally said, as she wasn't able to form a sentence, as she was having a hard time keeping the image of him out of her head. She sighed and slightly nodded, despite it only being less than a day they met she couldn't say that she wasn't attracted to him. It's just he kept me from falling on the train, he flirts with me non-stop, but only me, and he's very attractive. Not in the normal way, but in the way that it's subtly drawing you in. She said, burying her face in her hands again and looking towards the kitchen, hearing his laughter. You know, you two aren't subtle at all. Everyone saw his reaction to your costume. Jiru teased her and laughed when the girls squealed indignantly. Suddenly, Mina jumped up and looked at them. Why don't we go and see what they're doing? Mina said with an evil smirk, and before either of the girls could protest, she dragged them into the kitchen where they were hit by a mix of spices that made their mouths water. They looked on in surprise that it was only Midoriya cooking, but he was laughing and talking with the guys like it was nothing. Hey guys. Mina said, walking towards them before sitting next to Kirishima as Jiru took a spot next to Kaminari. Momo looked conflicted before sitting on the countertop right next to Midoriya, who raised an eyebrow and smirked. Told you guys they would come for my food. Homemade pork pot stickers. He said confidently before winking at Momo as the other two groaned and slapped 1,000 yen each on the counter that Midoriya promptly picked up and put in his pocket before taking off his shirt, the what from the stovetop being too much for him, causing Momo to choke on air as she hopped down to get some cold water to hopefully cover what happened, but she knew he saw. Oh Momo, won't you be a dear and help me get a few bowls for everyone? I made extra, he said in a sing-song voice, making it obviously clear that he was teasing her before getting behind her and whispering in your ear. You're blushing, like really badly. He finally left her alone and got the bowls as Momo tried to calm herself down. She had almost turned around and made out with him right there, but that would definitely seem weird to the rest of her friends. She finally calmed down and sat next to him at the table before taking a bite of the food. Wow. She said in amazement, eating the rest of her food quickly as the others did the same as he chuckled. Aside from being a walking armory, I do have hobbies. He laughed and rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed, but laughed with the group, enjoying the rest of the time with his friends before they went to turn in. Momo glanced at him and noticed that he seemed a bit embarrassed when he mentioned hobbies. She was definitely going to ask him about it. He let them know he would clean, but Momo stayed behind to help him out and question. Why were you embarrassed when you said hobbies? She asked him as she cleaned the bowls as he dried them and put them in the rack. He sighed and looked at her. I never really had friends since I didn't show off my quirk. People found out and started calling me villain and warmonger. Warlord I don't mind as much, but I try to be peaceful when possible. I create weapons and they kill, hell I make guns and wars are fought with guns. That's what sets me and you apart. Your quirk allows you to create anything as long as you know the chemical composition. My quirk turns me into a walking threat. Besides showing a more vulnerable and angry but sad side that she didn't expect from him. But you're not. She said after a few seconds, surprising him, and they faced each other. You're kind, albeit a flirt, but you're incredibly kind and compassionate. Not to mention stubborn and passionate about what you believe in. Especially when it comes to someone trying to peep on the girls in your class. she said, smiling and causing him to blush. I've known you for a whole day maybe, and I can already tell that you're going to be in the top 10 by the time you're 21. She said, before grabbing his chin and forcing him to look at her, as he had turned his head in slight embarrassment, now he was forced to look into her eyes. Don't believe whatever the fuck they said, Izuku. Look at me, I don't care that I'm called high class or stuck up. I don't care about the pressure placed on me for different reasons, granted there are things that get to me, but you have all this potential that you're using. Don't let people that drag you down keep doing so. She said before wrapping her arms around the green-haired boy, shocking him, but he wrapped his arms around her tightly, letting a few tears out. After a few minutes he chuckled. You know, you call me a hero, yet here you are breaking into my personality and life like no one else has before. He laughed and they pulled away, Momo looking at the boy again. Instead of the flirtatious, uncaring front that he normally had, she saw the real him. Kind, caring, and strong, and she really liked the real side of him. Before she could think, she leaned up and placed a kiss. He stared at her for what seemed like an eternity before shocking her and kissing her again. After a few minutes they broke, breathing heavily. So you want to go on a date tomorrow? He said only as a half joke, hoping that she would say yes. She rolled her eyes and nodded, lightly punching his shoulder. I've known you for a day and we're already dating. She rolled her eyes, but laughed anyway. You know they're placing bets on this, right? She mentioned what they heard Mina say earlier, despite her obvious attempts at being quiet. Yay. But whatever, since when did you care about anyone's opinion? He said, poking her in the stomach, causing her to giggle. Well, he just chuckled as they started walking up to their rooms, which were just a few doors down from the other. Never, by the way mister, I have hobbies, you gotta show me more of them. As he was about to make a joke, she slapped her hand over his mouth. Nope. I'm not turning into a tomato for the rest of the night, especially since the kitchen incident. She said, looking at him with a determined look. Kitchen incident? He said with a look that screamed that he knew exactly what she was talking about. Yup. Now shut up and go to bed, dork. She said, kissing his cheek quickly before going into her room and closing the door, leaving him at her door smiling like an idiot. Alright. He said before walking to his room and showering before going to bed, the dumb smile he wore never fading once. The next week. We're going to the USJ, determine if you need your costumes or not. Aizawa said shortly before looking at Midoriya. Your request for a new cooling system in your suit is being added, so you can't wear yours today. He said, as Midoriya nodded sadly at the news, as he looked wearing it, even if it was hotter than the 7th ring of hell. Aw, does the little warmonger feel sad at not being able to wear his costume? Bakugo said with a sneer, but seemingly less malice that he used during the previous week. Shut up, explosivo. Midoriya said, as they walked to the changing room, and he changed into his PE uniform while everyone else pretty much had their costumes on. Granted, his costume was just for defense, so he wasn't at a major disadvantage, but still he missed it already before walking out, just as Momo did. Just like last week, his jaw dropped, Iida laughing at him slightly, as everyone seemed to know that there was something going on between the weapons master and creationist. Momo just rolled her eyes and closed his mouth with a finger again. Maybe I should wear this more to get you to stop talking, huh? She said, making fun of the boy, causing Iida to laugh again as they walked down to the bus. Yay. He said with a blush, finally realizing that he was staring when Momo finally started to blush. Midoriya, you really should try to focus since today is rescue training. As much as you two are around each other, I'm surprised you still have this reaction. Iida said seriously, but also poked fun at the green-haired boy. Everyone's a fucking jockster when it comes to me. He muttered while walking, while letting his head roll back so he could stare at the sky when they got out, causing the two people next to him to laugh at his muttering. They climb onto the bus and Midoriya takes his seat with a pout, but Momo just laughs and sits next to him. Are you gonna pout this entire trip? She asked, laughing at his face and moving his hair out of his eyes, causing him to blush. Maybe. He said, turning away from her in a huff, turning to hide his blush, but not really working. Oh, you poor thing. She said with some attitude, which caused him to shiver as he felt her arm slide around his midsection. Would a kiss make it better? She whispered in his ear. He nodded and she laughed, kissing him lightly when he finally turned around, giving him a smile. Kaminari decided to pop up at that time to make fun of them, with Jiru helping, causing Midoriya to activate his quirk, causing Kaminari to run off, leaving Jiru as she wasn't threatened by him. Cool it, weapon head. She just laughed, going to sit with Kaminari, Kirishima and Mina as she instructed them to call her. He rolled his eyes at the nickname but leaned back against his chair and Momo rested her head against his shoulder, playing with his fingers. Are you excited for your new costume? She asked him as the bus started and drove away. She and he had redone his costume so that it would be cooler, resulting in using more breathable material that would be just as durable. That took them the longest amount of time to get done, as it seemed to take forever to find a durable and breathable material that wouldn't sacrifice comfort. They had finally figured it out with Momo's intensive knowledge of chemical compounds and Izuku's knowledge of items used in war. Of course. It took us days to figure it out. We started last week Tuesday and just finished it this morning just before class so that I could hand in the form. It's Friday. He said, smiling and rubbing her knuckles with his thumb. Well, they hadn't said they were boyfriend and girlfriend, they surely acted like it. They had gone on a few dates while it was still early in the semester, but now that it was picking up they had to slow down. He smiled anyway and gently nudged her as he thought of all the time that they had spent a lot of their time together. He was grateful that power loader allowed him to keep his belts, as he thought that it was going to be important that he had some equipment to help someone who was hurt. Along with that, he had questioned Izawa about his capture cloth and that he was possibly interested in using it. This surprised him, as he could summon all types of weapons, but when Midoriya revealed he was concerned about his stamina use and overdependence on his quirk, he smirked. Midoriya was surprised that he had even offered to train him with it, but took up the opportunity in an instant. He was given the same cloth as Izawa, but had only been practicing for the past week or so, making it a much bigger struggle than he had originally thought. He was jostled out of his thoughts when the bus came to a stop and found himself in front of a giant dome building. Alright, let's get going. Izawa called and they all departed the bus and entered the building. From what they could see, it was a multi-purpose area where there were many different types of rescue exercises, from fires to landslides to a sinking ship. Whoa, didn't expect this. Midoriya mumbled to himself as Momo agreed. "UA definitely went all out for this, huh?" he says to her before stretching and adjusting his capture cloth. She just nods and waits for Izawa to start the class when she notices a pro hero at the front. "Isn't that 13? She asks him and he nods suddenly, more excited and engaged than a few seconds before. "No way, she was almost the number 1 in the rescue category." Uraraka calls out and starts to nerd out, surprising everyone, but quickly realizing that she wanted to be a rescue hero, so it was understandable that her favorite hero would be 13. Izawa went to talk to 13 and for some reason All Might wasn't there, but when 13 held up 3 fingers, Midoriya quickly realized that All Might was apparently on a time limit. "Hello students. I will be explaining what we are going to be doing here today." 13 called out and started to explain the USJ when suddenly Midoriya and Izawa turned to the center and got defensive stances. 13 whirled around looking at the small portal that grew into a full one with the size of a side of a house. "Stay behind 13. Izawa called. Suddenly villains poured out of it, standing there like they were waiting for some type of orders. The last 2 figures seemed to be the ringleaders of the entire operation. A man with blue hair and hands all over him, and one who seemed like he opened the portal of the black mist that enveloped him, was anything to go by. "The main boss isn't here, I guess we'll just have to take care of the mini-bosses in front of us. Kurogiri, split them up." The blue-haired man growled out and pointed towards the class's direction. Instantly, Midoriya grabbed Momo close to him, not willing to split them up as they were too good of a team together. Suddenly, Kurogiri appeared through a portal. "Hello children. Goodbye," he said, opening a massive portal, and Midoriya felt himself fall into one with Momo twisting himself, so he lands on his back with her on top of him. He grunts as he lands on rocks, rolling down a bit. "Duke," he groans as he lies there as Momo sits up and checks him over, sighing as he has all of his equipment and captured cloth. He groans before sitting up and checking on her, relieved that he was the one with the bruises instead of her. "Looks like we're in the landslide zone," he observed as she nodded and stood up with him as he scanned around them. "Villains are close," he muttered as he readied his cloth and a handgun that he summoned, something that wouldn't put massive strain on his stamina. He was right when villains started to pop up in front of them as they backed themselves to a cliff so they couldn't be flanked. Momo created a staff and got into a stance ready for whatever was going to happen. "I'll bring em close and you whack me," he said, trying to hide his smile as he saw none of the big fish from earlier. She just nodded, gaining a serious expression, while his stance was more relaxed before he burst into action. He instantly used his cloth on the nearest villain, pulling them in as Momo swung hard, knocking him out, causing the rest of the villains to pause. "They're just kids. We'll kill the green one and have fun with the girl," someone yelled, and instantly Midoriya was pissed and Momo paled slightly. Forgoing his own rule, he let the capture cloth slide back to its place and let the gun disappear. Instantly, he glared at the villains with murderous intent that he learned from being pushed down and tormented his entire life. He pulled out swords that looked dangerous, a green liquid dripping down the blade, causing the villains to react in surprise. One was foolish enough to charge the green-haired teen and was instantly on the ground, unable to move. "You can hurt me, but you will never touch her," he said, standing in front of her, completely forgetting their earlier plan. As the villains charged, he went into action leaving deep but non-lethal cuts. Soon, thanks to Midoriya in the front line and Momo in the back, they cleaned up the villains, and he glared at them raising his sword again before she stopped him, wrapping her arms around him. "They're unconscious, you can stop," he muttered lightly as he let his arms and control drop, the swords disappearing before they hit the ground. He instantly turned around and hugged her. "I'm sorry, but they were not getting to you, I couldn't live with myself if they did," he muttered as they started to walk towards the main area, but he grabbed her hand gently looking down, ashamed that he lost his control. "That's what they meant, right? When you lose control you basically get a battle craze?" She asked him gently, knowing that it was something that he was sensitive about, but he nodded, not saying anything, and she leaned up to kiss his cheek. "Maybe it's not a bad thing. You're like a warlord, but you protect the people you care about," she says kindly and rubs his knuckles with her thumb, getting him to smile a bit before they hear a boom in the main plaza. Instantly, they ran towards it, assuming that their teacher was in danger. When they arrived, it was a horror scene. Yes, the villains were on the ground, but there were 3 still up. The warp gate user, the handman, and a new arrival. The new arrival was a terrifying sight, a giant bird-like creature combined with dead eyes and exposed brain. What was worse was that their teacher was having his bones broken by the giant bird. Instantly, they took off, seeing Mineta, Kaminari, Jiru, and Tsu in the water. When those 4 saw the duo, they also took off towards the stairs. However, Midoriya had different ideas. Having no idea if he was able to do it, he stopped guarding his friend's backs, kidding. "Get ready to get sensei," he called to the 5 before taking a deep breath as suddenly dangerous aura surrounding him. "Domain expansion," he said with a calmness they haven't seen from him, but if they were able to see his face, it looked like a murderer took possession of him. "Unholy Armory," he yelled, and suddenly the entire area around them turned white, the water turning into the white material they stood on. Nothing happened except for that which confused him before white faceless soldiers climbed out of the ground. Armor from all eras and places appeared, Japanese uniforms from the Boshin War to American uniforms from World War II, all carrying various weapons. The heavily armored front line advanced on the Nomu, driving him away from Izawa somehow to the snipers and riflemen in the back, constantly putting damage into him, rendering the Nomu on the ground and seemingly unconscious. The Nomu didn't go down without a fight, however, he destroyed some of the soldiers, but they already seemed fragile, almost as if they were made of glass. Izawa was picked up by Kaminari, and Tsu was already halfway up the stairs as Midoriya collapsed, his head pounding with pain that seemed to shoot through his very nerves. Tsu and Momo started running to him as Mineta just stood there terrified but ready to use his balls to defend his friend, even if said friend had beat the hell out of him. "No." They heard a terrifying scream that sounded from the hand-covered man who stalked towards them. "No," he yelled again, pointing at Midoriya. "You cheated." "How?" he growled, coming closer, Tsu yanking Midoriya back. "Careful, he disintegrates the things he touches." He nodded, knowing that he was dead weight at the moment, praying that this migraine would just go away. "Let's try to get back." They all nodded, Mineta throwing the balls at the hand-covered man, stalling before Midoriya tripped tumbling to the ground. Instantly, the villain was on his hand so close to touching his face, but instead a boom was heard and All Might stood in front of him with a frown. "Are you alright?" he asked a group who nodded and stayed there, knowing that this was the safest place to be now, when suddenly Todoroki, Bakugo, and Kirishima showed up, taking places in front of the group. "I ran into young Iida, he informed me and the teachers that there were villains here. They'll be here soon." Suddenly, Midoriya wasn't looking at him, but instead at Nomu. "How?" he muttered through his pain, which was slowly lessening, but not enough. It was on the ground, dead. Standing up, the Nomu was perfectly fine, except for small pinholes where the bullets from the soldiers entered. "No worries. I will take care of it," All Might said before taking off. Todoroki, Bakugo, and Kirishima stood in front of them. Kirishima went to the group and checked on them. "Midoriya, what the hell, man? What was that power you used?" he asked, grabbing bandages from Midoriya's belt, wrapping them around Midoriya's wounds that he didn't remember getting. Instantly seeing his confusion, Momo ran her hands through his hair. Bakugo looked like he saw a ghost when Midoriya used that technique, and Todoroki looked at him with a different light, almost like he was a threat. "You got them from our first fight," she told him gently as he nodded, his energy spent looking as All Might finished off the Nomu quickly, partially due to the amount of damage that Midoriya put in. "New technique," he muttered, seeing the rest of the teachers get there and finish everything. All Might was cut off by Cementus, who was next to them, making sure they were okay. "My quirk uses my stamina, making it manifest," he said, closing his eyes. "Brought that out, I wasn't sure if that was going to work," he muttered, and Cementos looked at him with wide eyes but didn't question it, making sure to look at the security footage later. Midoriya was soon asleep, head in Momo's lap, before being lifted up and sent to Recovery Girl with her in the ambulance with them. The rest of the class was addressed and informed of everyone who was injured. All of them were questioned by police and released, informed that they would be taking a long weekend and the next week would start on Tuesday. Tuesday? Momo, I'm fine. Midoriya groaned for about the 50th time that weekend. He hadn't been able to get healing due to being almost completely out of stamina, but was content to just let the scrapes and small cuts heal on their own. The entire weekend Momo had spent the night in his dorm room as he had been exhausted until about midday Monday. She was scared because his stamina was almost completely drained, recovery girls said, but the worst part was when the principal came in. Sunday. A knock was heard while Midoriya and Momo were talking, and in came the principal, All Might and Cementosis. Young Midoriya, what was that? All Might asked with no hesitation. The domain expansion. He asked as they all nodded, looking at each other as Momo grabbed Midoriya's hand as he breathed out heavily. It's a manifestation of my own stamina and quirk. He started out explaining everything of how he created the technique but never tried it before, but his body took over and forced it out, emptying his entire stamina reserve into the technique. That explains the damage the Nomu took, Principal Nezu said before sighing. It's concerning, as this has never happened before in the history of quirks. There was someone whose quirk resolved around space, which allowed them to be able to create something akin to what you achieved. Until you learn to control how much stamina it uses, I think you should hold off. Midoriya couldn't agree more. He was still so tired from using it that he barely was able to stay awake at times. Flashback end. You used up all of your stamina in one move, almost killed someone unkillable, and made All Might be able to beat that guy in less than 10 hits when we don't know if he would be able to beat it normally. Momo said with her hands on her hips as she stuck close by him as they walked to class. Everyone had already left and, as such, they were the last ones in. I wonder who will be here instead of Aizawa. She said to him as they entered, but jumped, seeing a mummy where their teacher would normally be. Yes, now sit down, but Midoriya. A word after class. He said as the boy nodded and sat down ready for class. Now, an important task. Choose your class reps. Also, the sports festival is next week, so be prepared and get your abilities under control. He said before laying down and getting into his sleeping bag as they exclaimed that it was something normal for once. The class all started talking about how to decide it, but finally Iida stood up. I think it should be up to a vote. He said over everyone. The class agreed with him. I know everyone might just vote for themselves, but that will determine who should be class representative. He said, and they all agreed. After a while they tallied up the votes, Midoriya being the only to have 3, and Momo being the only to have 2, which shocked both of them before they graciously accepted. The bell rang, and Midoriya waited for Aizawa to get up and talk to him with the rest of his friends waiting just outside for him. Problem child, first off thank you. You probably saved my life back there at the USJ, and I'm thankful. Midoriya sighed, relieved that this was all they were going to talk about. But he paled at that. I don't want you saving me if you are going to die instead. I heard of what you did and that technique, learn how to control it and it will be useful for you to use. I have no idea what it is or how you did it, but good job. He said finally before letting him go. Unknown to him, Aizawa was feeling immense relief and thankfulness, he just didn't know how to put it into words. It was time for lunch. Midoriya was starving and, as such, got as much as he could hold onto his plate and ate like he was starving. Iida, Uraraka, and Momo joined him, looking at him as he attacked his food with a wild fervor, trying to eat as much as he could until someone's elbow hit his head. He looked up and saw a member of Class 1B, Nido Monoma. Midoriya swallowed and raised an eyebrow. Do you need anything? He said, eating more as he was still starving. As much as he ate and slept over the weekend, he was still feeling somewhat heavy. I bet Class A thinks that you're so much better than us in the B class now that you faced villains, don't you? But it won't take long for us to take over and remove your act. He said, suddenly slumping down, leaving them all in surprise as a new person held up the mouthy boy. Sorry about that. I have no idea what's wrong with him. She sighs before looking up again and introducing herself. But I'm Itsuka Kendo, nice to meet you. They all introduced themselves and said that it was no big deal. I'll keep him away from you all to make sure he doesn't start anything. We know you have your own feral child. She says before walking away to go sit down and eat with some of her class in tow. She called Bakugo a feral child. Midoriya laughed loudly after swallowing his food as everyone else rolled their eyes. Despite their attitudes, neither of them had severe anger or hatred towards the other anymore. The biggest case being the USJ incident where Bakugo caught a glimpse of what Midoriya could do, finally gaining a type of tough respect from him that you can only do when fighting for your life. Midoriya gained some respect for Bakugo after they talked while he was in bed, both struggling to get past the pride they had. Maybe she was talking about you, Momo said, taking a bite of her food. You ate half of that plate in like 10 minutes, that should have taken you all of lunch. Midoriya looked at her indignantly and rolled his eyes, bumping shoulders. I can't participate in any practical stuff until my energy is fully back by the way. Aizawa said that he was informed of what I did and was thankful but didn't want me to kill myself in the process. He said, sighing, and finished off his food, rubbing the back of his neck, embarrassed about all the focus that was on him since he was able to pull off that domain expansion. Good thing, we have nothing practical for today. You should be in shape tomorrow. Iida said, comforting his friend. Despite them not hanging out, they still were best friends. They had formed a close friendship when they were together, which had evolved into rivals and best friends, allowing them to joke and be more comfortable around each other. Yay, I would be bummed out if I didn't get a chance to try it out again. He said, causing all three of them to either facepalm, Iida, a look of disbelief, Uraraka, and a smack to the back of his head, Momo. I was joking, damn. He muttered, rubbing the back of his head as she had one hell of a swing, but chuckling. I won't try it out unless I have someone with me. I can't really decide how much stamina it uses, but it seems like a set amount, so I could probably just increase my stamina. He muttered, making everyone at the table sigh as suddenly alarms rang out loudly, everyone rushing for an exit before Midoriya grabbed an upperclassman. What the hell is going on? He asked as the boy looked frantic. Level 3 threat. Intruder. We have to evacuate. He said simply before leaving quickly to get outside with the rest of his class. As they went to leave, everyone was getting jostled around and in a panic. Before long he looks at Momo and she nods, creating two knives. He jumps and stabs them into the wall, looking out the opposite window. Below him, Momo looks up for what happened, tossing him a megaphone. Hey. He yells into it, stopping everyone as he looks at them all. It's just a press, calm down and leave quickly but orderly. As he drops to the ground, everyone does as he says, and he sighs, finally able to get out with everyone else. However, he stopped freezing. There was murderous intent somewhere and he had to stop it. Before he could move, Present Mick put a hand on his shoulder. You felt it but stayed out of it. All Might and Cementos are on it. He says, making sure not to mention the murderous intent. All he could do was get to the dorms and stay there until they were given the go-ahead. He got to the dorms and changed into his usual muscle shirt and basketball shorts and flopped on the bed. Soon, Momo arrived and let herself in, flopping on his bed, immediately pulling out his phone and pairing it to his speaker that was left on and plugged in. He turned on WVSB Mr. Probs, the Robin Schultz radio mix, and just laid there before Momo plopped down near his head, running her hands through his hair. He moved so his head was on her lap and closed his eyes, listening to the very vibey song and relaxing. I could fall asleep here. He said contentedly, but still worried about that feeling he got earlier, but pushed it to the furthest part of his mind. I probably should train though, summon the biggest and most complex thing I can. Maybe it would increase the strength and reduce the cost of my D. He was cut off by Momo kissing him before she pulled away. Got it, talking too much. He muttered and sat up, pulling her closer to him so that she ended up on his lap. Surprised, she let out a small squeak. He smirked and pulled her closer, just relaxing. He sighed contentedly, breathing out gently. We haven't done this since I was drained. He commented as he pulled a blanket over them and shifted so her head was against his chest. True. I was so scared, Izuku, she trailed off, gripping his shirt harder, letting it tear out. He almost got you. That Noma thing got back up. If All Might hadn't shown up, she trailed off, letting more tears go as she hadn't the entire weekend and he knew she needed to let it out. Despite the tough attitude, she was very in tune with her emotions. He held her as she let out the tears, just holding her so that he warmed her up with his own body heat. You won't have to worry again. He promised her, burying his face in her hair as she nodded slightly. Here, I have an idea. He said, finally grabbing his phone again, changing the song, which started off with a deep bass chord. Song is Feels Calvin Harris. As the song started, he sang along with a male voice and poked Momo to sing the female part, bringing a small smile to her face. Ah, yeah. Hey. Now, nothing ever lasts forever, no. 1 minute you're here and the next you're gone. So I respect you, wanna take it slow. I need a mental receipt to know this moment I owe. Do you mind if I steal a kiss, though? Chop, chop. At that part, he kissed her cheek and laughed when she blushed as he tried to go along with the song. A little souvenir, can I steal it from you? To memorize the way you shock me. The way you move it here, hey. Just wanna feel it from you, hey. At this part it switched to the female part and Izuku tried to get her to sing. Finally she relented and joined in. Don't be afraid to catch feels. Ride drop top and chase thrills, hey. I know you ain't afraid to pop pills, hey. Baby, I know you ain't scared to catch feels. Feels with me. She pokes him gently as they remember the first day they met when he had shamelessly flirted with her on the train and from that day on hadn't stopped. Not that they were complaining. I'm your window shopper, sucker for your love, oh. I'm wearing your goggles, virtual reality. It ain't what it cost you, it might be $1. As long as it shocks you, memory, electricity. Do you mind if I steal a kiss, though? Chop, chop. At this party stole a quick kiss from her, again causing her to laugh instead of just blushing, pushing him slightly. A little souvenir, can I steal it from you? Oh, yeah. To memorize the way you shock me, yeah. The way you move it here, hey. Just wanna feel it from you, hey. Momo started off again having more fun that last time and moving a bit to the beat as they stood up just moving to the music. Don't be afraid to catch feels, ha. Ride drop top and chase thrills, oh. I know you ain't afraid to pop pills, hey. Baby, I know you ain't scared to catch feels, straight up. Feels with me, whoa. She didn't expect him to continue on with the verse as Midoriya started to rap with the verse shocking her. God damn, I know you love to make an entrance, babe. Do you like getting paid or getting paid attention? Like, whoa. You mixed the wrong guys with the right intentions. In the same bed, but it still feel long distance, yeah. She's looking for a little more consistency, I know. But when you stop looking, you gon' find what's meant to be. And honestly, I'm way too done with the hoes, no. I cut off all my X's for your X and O's. I feel my old flings was just preparing me. When I say I want you, say it back, parakeet, par. Fly in first class through the air, whoa. I'm the best you had, you just be comparing me to me, whoa. Am at this at you, if I put you on my phone, whoa. And upload it, it'll get maximum views. I came in through in the clutch with the lipsticks and phones. Wear your fave cologne just to get you alone. She laughed as he rapped the verse perfectly, knowing that he never had any relationships before her and she before him. As much as he flirted, she knew she was something special to him. Don't be afraid to catch feels, ha. Don't be afraid to catch these feels. Ride drop top and chase thrills, yeah. Yeah. I know you ain't afraid to pop pills, I know. Baby, I know you ain't scared to catch feels. Whoa. Feels with me. Don't be afraid to catch feels, no. Don't be afraid, baby. Don't be afraid. Ride drop top and chase thrills, whoa, okay. I know you ain't afraid to pop pills. I know. Baby, I know you ain't scared to catch feels. Feels with me. As the song finished, she laughed and hugged him gently before hearing a crash outside his room. Shit. They heard before going out of his room seeing quite a few of their classmates with Kaminari on the floor. Hey. He said, causing everyone to burst out laughing and smile. So what are you guys doing? He asked and looked around at the group consisting of Kaminari, Kirishima, Jiru, Mina, Hagakure, Iida, Tsu, Uraraka, and Tokoyami. We heard someone singing and thought that it was a YouTube video, but it turned out to be you too. Mina said enthusiastically as an excited Hagakure nodded. You guys were in sync and sounded like you were having so much fun. We never knew you guys could sing like pros. It sounded like you two were icons. She said, grabbing their hands and jumping up and down as the two mentioned blushed but accepted the phrase. You extras didn't know Warmonger could sing. Bakugo said as he walked up the stairs before laughing and going into his room. We were friends as kids. Until he got his quirk and thought he was hot shit but then pushed me away when I got mine. Midoriya said, shaking his head and sighing but smiling. But yay, I've been taking lessons until I got into UA. He admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, Momo smirking slightly as she knew after she finally got to tell him his hobbies. You should eat his food when he cooks. It's so manly. Kirishima said as Kaminari nodded. Dude has some skills, if he wasn't a hero he could have been a cook or something. Maybe in his past life. Kaminari said, high-fived Midoriya who was trying to disagree, but no one who ate his food let him. Really? Midoriya, I had no idea that you were a man of so many talents. Iida commented and nodded towards him as the other boy nodded back. Midoriya, we're going to be here for a while. Would you be willing to cook or bake something? Tokoyami asked, looking at the rest who nodded, especially Momo, since she had been having him cook for her when he had the energy. He sighed when he looked at her, when she pulled the puppy eyes he gave in instantly. Fine. He sighed but shook his head. But I get to decide what I get to make. He said, and they all agreed to just eat. Might as well make some for everybody, huh? He walked down to the kitchen and got ready to make something, but couldn't decide for a few minutes. I think I'm gonna make something American. He muttered to himself before checking for ingredients, which luckily they had everything. Alright. He said before starting, and Bakugo walked in as everyone else left for the common room. Warmonger, are you making Auntie's barbecue pork slides? He asked, looking at all the ingredients, and hopped in to help when the green-haired boy nodded. He said suddenly, as they were cooking, causing Midoriya to look up and sigh. I never hated you, idiot, I just tried to show you that neither of us were better. He said, as he put things into the oven and was going to toast all the buns he was going to use while Bakugo made the coleslaw. I didn't. I think all the praise and worship got to my head. He said, sighing and putting the finishing touches on it while Midoriya pulled the stuff out of the oven and made the sliders. Yay, you really fucking did. Midoriya said plainly, still not fully able to forgive Bakugo, who nodded. Well, let's try so Aizawa doesn't fucking kill us. He said, looking at the ash blonde finally, who nodded and grudgingly extended his hand to him. Which Midoriya grabbed reluctantly before they both got to work after turning on some music and before long finishing calling everyone into the dining area, shocking them that Bakugo had helped. You extras are better like this. This is Auntie Inko's best recipe. Bakugo growled. Despite the two boys seemingly hating each other for the longest time, Bakugo still had massive amounts of respect for her. Midoriya rolled his eyes but sat down as everyone in class finally got some food in front of them and they dug in. It was silent for a bit before everyone started talking again, some of how good the food was, some exclaiming that they had no idea the green-haired boy and the ash-blonde boy could cook so well. Relatively quickly they all finished, feeling satisfied with the meal. Midoriya went up to clean before being pushed to his seat by Momo. Nope. We'll take care of cleaning up. You two relax, you guys really did well. She said, smiling before leaning in. If you stay here you might get a reward for actually letting someone help you. She whispered before going to the kitchen, leaving him starstruck. How the fuck can she do that to me? He muttered, causing Iida, Kirishima and Kaminari to all laugh at the boy. Maybe because you have hard eyes for her anytime you see her. Kaminari teased him and poked his face as he stared at Momo from his spot before shaking his head. Ignoring Kaminari until he shocked him lightly, causing the electric boy to dash out of the room. He's not wrong, Midoriya. You seem to be distracted whenever she is around, but you also seem more focused, if that's a good way to put it. Iida said, looking at his friend who just looked betrayed at this point, causing Kirishima to laugh and Bakugo to smirk slightly. But he sighed, just letting his head drop to the table, knowing that they were going to counter anything that he said. Plus, he couldn't deny it. They were dating, they just hadn't discussed labels yet, not that they needed it. Okay, maybe he has a point, but like it's not that obvious, right? He asked, looking up at the group of three since Kaminari came back when his head was down. They looked at each other before laughing loudly, causing the rest of their class to look at them with confusion. Hey. That wasn't an answer. He said, as they left, leaving him dumbfounded and looking at Chiru, Mina and Uraraka. Was that an answer? They sighed and shook their heads, following the boys out as everyone started to leave, sighing heavily again, waiting for Momo and Hagakure to finish. Bakugo hit him upside the head and walked away, rolling his eyes. It's so fucking obvious a blind man could see it, Warmonger. He growled out and rolled his eyes, walking out and not saying anything else, leaving Midoriya to blush. After a while, the two girls finished and Hagakure left while Momo came and grabbed his hand as they walked to her room, since it had the bigger bed. He smiled as they got to her room and flopped on her bed. As she flopped next to him, he sighed and rolled over, letting his arm drape over her. You're cute when you're all flustered. Momo observed and laughed when he huffed, but he turned back. And you're gorgeous when you're in bed next to me. He added with a wink as she rolled her eyes. Smooth, Izuku. Smooth. She rolled her eyes but kissed him anyway, causing him to smile. You've been working in secret on that technique, haven't you? She said suddenly, causing him to sweat a bit. I've been. He sighed, just completely foregoing any lies. I've been working on the size and complexity of a weapon, so I've been expanding my limit. That's why I've literally been eating and sleeping almost 24/7. He admitted as she shook her head and stood up before he pulled her back down. No. I'm mad at you. She said, not looking at him before he turned her around to see his pout. Not gonna work. She said before he suddenly leaned in and kissed her, dissolving any source of anger that she had before she sighed. You're an idiot. You should have been resting. I know, I just can't lose during the sports festival. He said, trying to convey what he was thinking through his eyes as he stared into her onyx orbs without wavering. She nodded and rubbed his arm gently. I know. She said simply before smiling and dragging him to lie down fully. Now, no leaving tonight to train. If you do, I won't talk to you for a week. She said, laughing as he gained a look of false horror before he laughed. Gotcha. He said simply and kissed her forehead and laid down to actually rest instead of recovering. Good night, Izuku. Momo said and slowly closed her eyes, letting herself move closer to him. Good night, Momo. He said and closed his eyes, letting sleep consume him. Now, here to give the opening words are number 1 in the placement test overall. Izuku Midoriya. Midnight called out as he emerged from the crowd on the field and walked up to the stage and looked around. Nervous, he glanced at Momo, who smiled before taking a breath and speaking. "Hey. My name is Izuku Midoriya," he said with a blinding smile before looking around. "I earned the first spot overall, and let me say it wasn't easy. My classmates constantly remind me that if I don't improve I'll be behind." He paused, looking out at the rest of the students. "I hope the other classes take inspiration from the festival and improve too. Not only are we heroes, but we are members of society. And, as those members, we'll strive and make our society better." Class 1 was attacked by villains at the UTJ, resulting in art teachers being injured and people questioning the reliability of UA to the villains, growling at the screens. "Looking at me now. Be scared because we are coming after you." He finished in a yell, looking directly at the cameras, almost verbally challenging the villains to come after him right then and there. Summoning a sword that blazed with bright light, he raised it above his head, causing a roar from the crowd and making them yell in approval. He walked down the stairs slowly and walked away with his class, and, as soon as he got inside the tunnel deep enough for no one to be able to see him, he leaned against the wall. "Jesus Christ, what the fuck? I basically asked them to attack me." He groaned as they all laughed. As confident as he was, he hated public speaking. Hiroshima wiped away a tear and hit his chest with a fist. "That was so manly." He complimented Midoriya as the boy chuckled, and they moved to the locker rooms to get ready for the obstacle course. "PFFT, it was okay." Shoulder told the extras to just give up. Bakugo grumbled under his breath, still sore that Midoriya had beaten him in the written and practical of the entrance exam, causing everyone to roll their eyes. "Bakugo, for the love of God, just get to the fucking locker rooms and shut up." Midoriya groaned and rubbed the bridge of his nose in annoyance. He took a breath before walking to their waiting room. They were forced to wait until everyone and everything was ready, as were proper precautions taken by UA. Getting into the locker room, he finally relaxed, able to just not think and not worry how the heroes up in the stand would perceive him. He sat down and grabbed his notebook of weapon notes from his bag, studying up on them to make sure that he had them all down and ready to use. "Midoriya," a voice said, and his head shot up, looking at Todoroki with a confused face. "Theoretically speaking, I'm stronger than you," the bi-colored boy said, causing the other to raise his eyebrow and clench his jaw tightly. "But you are the most even in skill here today, so I will beat you with just my ice to show my father how useless his fire is to me," he said, looking at the green eyes steadily, which started to almost smolder from the anger inside the boy. "Todoroki. Take this politely, but fuck that," the green boy said, standing up, slamming the notebook on the table and getting in the other's face. "I don't know whatever is going on in your head, but listen to my words clearly," he growled, pointing to his lips. "You may be stronger, but I will force every single ounce of effort out of you and I will rise to the top. If you're going to half-ass this sports festival, just drop out of it right now," he said before storming out, causing everyone to look at him in shock, never seeing the teen so volatile. Midoriya sighed and just walked to the start line. He had blown up, but the fact that he basically admitted he was half-assing this set his determination and anger on fire. Many of the other classes looked at him with something like jealousy, which annoyed him even more. Maybe it was the fact that he was number 1 overall, maybe it was his quirk or some other thing, but right now he didn't care about his anger fueling him to beat the other boy in every shape and form until he dropped from exhaustion. He shook his head, getting rid of any stray thoughts. If he knew UA, they were bound to make the first obstacle something that they weren't thinking of. He had to be on the top of his gaming, pissed off or not. He was right, it was utter chaos when the horn went off and everybody tried to get through the choke, but aside from himself, Ejiro, Tokoyami, Bakugo, Shiro, and Momo, Todoroki had freezed everyone in place. Ejiro got over everyone using his tail, Tokoyami had Dark Shadow lift him above everyone, Bakugo just flew with his explosions, Shiro swung up and away, Momo used a grappling hook, while he used a harpoon gun to cling to the roof and get just behind everyone. He growled, pouring a bit of speed into his run, catching up with everyone else. Slowly but surely he closed in on those whose quirks helped them with speed and made sure to stay at the back so he could see what obstacles there were. Making sure to keep the gun on hand, but keeping it in a position that didn't affect his running. "Fucking ice bastard." Bakugo yelled in front of him and closed in on Todoroki, letting the others get a breath of air. Midoriya at this time couldn't help but agree with Bakugo. Despite agreeing not to help each other earlier, Momo found herself right next to Izuku, which was fine since they saw the 0 pointers from the exam, and he smiled. He saw everyone skidding to stop, but he grabbed her arm and pulled her with him as he took off towards the gigantic robots. "They're slow as hell, we just leg it around me," He muttered to her, and he took off thankful that he didn't have to create another harpoon gun, managing to get the point stuck in a leg and skidding on the ice that was left by Todoroki. The boy had freezed a robot, letting him escape with minor difficulty, but made sure the ice was weak enough that after a few seconds it started to move again, just narrowly missing him. He caught up to the other boys, leaving the rest of them behind, seeing that some of the other students had caught up to them. She took his advice and went for it, making a beeline for the one that wasn't frozen, that was closest to the entrance, and weaved her way through the legs of the metal behemoth. She made it through, but was about to be hit with falling parts before Tsu came to help, picking her up, and landed on the track again, running next to the frog girl, almost unable to see the other two. Thanks Tsu, that was really close. She sighed in relief, looking at the next obstacle, which all three were almost through already. A pit with spires. There looks to be rope stretching between them, but it looks like they made this for you, huh, Tsu? The frog girl just smiled at her, and when they arrived she took off hopping across. Momo had no idea how Izuku did this, but she was determined to stand out. She got an idea, pole vaulters had to get over a bar, why couldn't she use one to get distance? She had a bare bones idea of the form, but it wouldn't work since she wasn't going for height, but distance. And I have no idea how it works, please comment and let me know if it's something completely different. She created a vaulting pole and used it to balance as she walked along the ropes, getting to the biggest gap. She looked up in determination. She went to the opposite side and ran using the pole, however it snapped and she was just able to snag the ledge and keep running towards the last obstacle. Midoriya fucking hated UA right now, mines. Really? He was at the edge, having lost his ground against the two boys who were either freezing their steps or just flying above them. He looked around and tried to think of anything to help him, there was nothing around him. Was he literally just going to have to hope and pray? Sure, he could see them, but watching out for them while fighting everyone else was surely not going to be easy. Slowly, he came up with an idea and smiled evilly. Creating a large kite shield, he used a point to dig up mines and gently piling them together, slowly forming a large pile that would launch him far. However, the rest of the students caught up and were running past him. Fuck, fuck, fuck. He growled and moved faster, getting a big enough pile, stealing himself. He ran from a bit back and jumped, landing on the mines. Momo was already halfway down the field when she heard the gigantic boom from behind, seeing her stupid weapon-happy boyfriend flying through on a shield before he landed just in front of Todoroki and Bakugo. Another explosion in front of her and she stumbled lightly before hearing him laugh while the other two cursed at him, and he landed skidding on the destroyed shield. He was able to get onto his feet and sprint across the finish line with Todoroki and Bakugo not far behind, claiming second and third respectively. As she finally got across the finish line, she put her hands on her knees and took deep breaths, filling her lungs before she looked up looking for Izuku. Momo? Did you see that? Speaking of said boyfriend, who was still smoldering from his stunt with the mines. That was fantastic. I wonder if I could create something like that to recreate that. I probably can't since I can't make things that last short term. Oh wait, that's kinda dumb since I create bullets, he muttered before being cut off by the girl, who looked exasperated. What in the hell made you think that was a good idea? They aren't powerful, but however much you used must have been dangerous. She sighed, rubbing her eyes, as he laughed again, still clearly fueled by adrenaline and nerves from pulling that stupid stunt. She let it drain out of him as he slowly calmed down and finally breathing after what seemed like hours. Sorry. That was stupid, but it was cool and flashy. He said as she rolled her eyes, nudging him to pay attention to Midnight, who was explaining their next activity of the festival. After the cavalry battle, everyone was given an hour break as Momo and Midoriya talked. Todoroki came up asking for him and the green-haired boy walked away while Momo waited for him. What's wrong with Todoroki? He asked, looking at the other boy in confusion as he looked at him, but it seemed like he wasn't really seeing him. Did you come here to give me your declaration of war again? He was still clearly agitated by the boy's refusal to give his all, indirectly insulting his classmates and their efforts. What do you know about quirk marriages? The bi-colored boy asked him, shocking the green teen, who suddenly regretted his words and decided to listen to the other. Todoroki proceeded to tell him about his life, how his dad had decided that he was going to be the one to surpass him and All Might and claim the #1 spot. How he had never known his brothers and sisters fully, only knowing that some resented him and some just felt plain sorry that he was the one that their father basically forced into the role. How his mother had burned the side that reminded her of his father, and how he had immediately sent her off to a facility without a whisper of a word of sorry. I'm going to make sure I go against you and prove to my old man I didn't need his fire to win. Make sure you get to the end where I can use you to show him that his power means nothing to me. Midoriya was pissed, more mad than he could have ever been. He had told him that he was just a stepping stone for him to use. Instead of the usual scathing reply, he walked away. He simply walked away with the determination to make him use his flames. Make him use his flames and stop making his flames out to be that of a devil's. He slowly walked back towards Momo, his jaw tight and fists clenched. He barely held himself back from going back and fighting the boy right then and there. She looked at him concerned as she was able to see the dark look on his face, along with his tight body posture. Before she could say anything, he hugged her tightly and she looked at him confused before sighing and running her hands through his hair, causing him to relax a bit. Maybe it's my pride or the fact he doesn't realize his power is his own, but when he said he would beat me with half his power, it really pissed me off. He growled in her ear, his hot breath hitting her neck. The feeling of his breath caused her to shiver, but she ignored those feelings and just nodded in understanding. Despite the boy in front of her being the exact ideal hero, his pride did get in the way at times. He worked hard to make his quirk work, training every day for it, and made it his own, somehow developing a technique that allowed him to control an area with all white faceless soldiers. He used every last drop of power he had to make himself into someone worthy of the title hero, and having someone tell him that his own efforts were less than half of theirs really set him off. It's understandable, Izuku. She kissed her cheek before smiling lightly up at him, determined to make him relax since he was up first against the mind control guy. Now let's go eat and talk about that pink-haired bitch who had her hands all over you during the cavalry battle. She said sweetly, causing him to laugh but shake his head at the mention of Mei Hatsume. Well, let's go before you kill me, he said and walked towards the door, eager to get to lunch rush to eat something, while avoiding the wrath of his sometimes rather possessive girlfriend. Start of the tournament. Now let's give it up for our favorite warlord, Izuku Midoriya. Midnight yelled as the crowd cheered and screamed as he came out onto the field. He didn't look at them, but instead just focused on his opponent, Shinso Hitachi. Ejiro had warned him about him and made sure that he gave his 2 cents of how his quirk might work. Midoriya took extensive notes on how other people fought with their quirks, realizing he could easily be beaten if someone took away his weapons he trained in martial arts to stand a chance. His quirk wasn't always going to help him or be able to be used like he wanted to, better to have a backup plan than just sink when that problem came around. Looking at Shinso, he knew it was the right move. While Shinso didn't train physically, his quirk was insanely powerful. He took a breath as Shinso was introduced and the match started. Man. You Class A fellas are insane, it's like you're unstoppable. But maybe that's not the case, you're the one who almost died during the USJ attack, right? Shinso said, trying to goad him into responding, which almost worked. He had opened his mouth but closed it, stalking towards Shinso. Shinso was frazzled seeing that didn't work, so he started talking again. You all have it so easy, great quirks and people to help you while we in the general studies are forced to lag behind. Your quirk is so great too. No wonder you're the top student. The students in the stands knew he was trying to get him to respond but didn't know why he was trying so hard. Maybe his quirk was activated by talking back. Or was it just communication that activated it? Momo was worried. She knew he was prideful and that everything he was saying was slowly getting to Midoriya, clear by the sword that was in his hands. Midoriya started but stopped responding, gaining a glazed look over his face, resulting in quite a few people groaning, seeing that he had easily fallen for whatever Shinso was doing. The purple-haired boy smiled, relieved that he had finally managed to get him to talk, and now it was over from there. Turn around and walk out of the arena, Shinso said plainly as the now limp body of Midoriya started walking towards the edge of the arena. Shit. Midoriya thought as he seemed to be looking through glass. As his body walked to the edge, he was panicking, not knowing what to do. He needed something to get him out of the trance that he was in thanks to Shinso's quirk. Every step he took meant one step further away from his goal of being a hero, of winning this tournament. And showing Todoroki he wasn't a stepping stone, instead he was the one that would be using the bi-colored hair boy as exactly that. A stone to elevate him further. All of a sudden everything became clear as he was 5 steps away from the edge of the arena. Cold clarity filled him and he smiled internally. Thinking back earlier to when he was fueled with adrenaline, he summoned all his energy and created a small explosive and let it blow. Coughing, Midoriya sat up and looked at where he was. Away from the edge and in control of his body again. He got up slowly, wincing, feeling his clothes shift around some burns, and turned around to look at Shinso, walking over to the boy who tried everything to make him talk, but it failed. His shirt falling off of him from the fire that he had failed to notice, he walked over to the boy. The purple-haired teen was frantically trying to get a response, but it was no use. Midoriya had figured it out and slapped his hand over his mouth, becoming more and more frustrated with each word that came out of the other's mouth. Grabbing Shinso and flipping him out of the arena, slamming him onto his back, forcing the air out of the other's lungs, before finally speaking back to Shinso. It took me years to get to this point. You had a good plan and idea, but I'll be damned if I let this slip away from me. Get yourself into the hero course and fight me again someday, yay? He said, holding a hand out to Shinso, who took it before walking away back to the tunnel. Don't you think it's an evil or villainous quirk? He yelled after the green-haired boy, who turned around, simply quieting the arena with his answer. No. Don't you hear them? Some of them wish they had your quirk. No, why? Think of how many situations you diffuse instantly with just your voice. Think of how many people would be safe without the need of combat. It's staggering. The crowd cheered again as Midoriya said his piece, but couldn't hear it as Midnight announced the winner, and he walked away, leaving Shinso with what he just said. Maybe the goal of being a hero isn't too far away for the purple-haired teen. As soon as Midoriya was out of sight, he let himself collapse against the wall, gritting his teeth and grabbing his side. Too powerful. Too damn powerful. He grunted, looking up. His ribs were definitely broken, his ears were ringing, and he probably had a concussion. Suddenly, a pair of slender hands helped him up and were helping him to the recovery girl's office. You incredibly wonderful stupid idiot. The voice said from the person carrying him. He looked sideways and saw black raven hair. That hurt. He muttered as she sighed and dragged him into the room where recovery girl was waiting and helped the creationist get him on a bed before running to her match against Tokoyami. He slowly slid into unconsciousness as he felt some of his energy disappear. Everything was slowly returning to normal, but still hurt. He watched Momo get into the arena and listened to the announcement before falling asleep before anything started. He's an idiot, alright, but at least he has you to drag his sorry ass here. Hopefully, he gets up for his match against that Todoroki kid. He heard someone say, and he groaned, trying to sit up but unable to due to a weight on his chest. He opened his eyes and looked into Momo's onyx ones. You're pretty. He said, slurring his words before kissing her head and closing his eyes again before being woken up by a hit of a walking stick. Get up, kid. Your match is soon. Recovery girl said before leaving the couple alone as he sat up, rubbing his head where she hit him. I lost. Momo said with tears in her eyes, and he could see that the confidence she normally had was shattered. He felt bad that he hadn't been up to be able to watch the match and help her out. But she didn't need that. What she needed was someone who was confident in her so she could regain at least some of her confidence back. Hey now, sit up, okay? He said, gently pulling her up so that she was sitting with her legs over his, and he looked into her eyes. You might have, but you still have to keep your wits about you, gorgeous. He said, brushing her tears aside as she latched onto him and wept silently. She pulled away after a few minutes, wiping her eyes and apologizing before he gently hit the back of her head, causing her to look up at the boy. Momo, you have nothing to apologize for. You lost, you're upset, but Momo, you still got it. You're smart as hell, you can figure a way to make this loss into something that's positive. I know you can. He said gently before kissing her forehead and leaving her there before going to tell them he's ready. She started to walk back to the student section before thinking about what he said and if she could improve and learn from this loss. She smiled slightly and shook her head, smacking her cheeks as she ran up to the stand, smiling a bit more. She got back and ran into Tokoyami, who looked surprised. Yaoyorozu, I apologize. She cut him off with a shake of her head and smiled up at him. No. Thank you. You made me realize that there are things that I can definitely improve on, and with that I know I can become a better hero. She said, smiling, and went to sit with Iida and Uraraka, nervous for the match that was about to happen. She knew Izuku could beat Todoroki, but what he was going to do was what worried her the most. The anger he felt when he was told that he could be beaten with half of someone's power was infuriating and intense, something that he wouldn't forgive. She was worried he was going to throw the match in order to get the recommended student to use the full force of his power, no matter what. She had no idea how right she was, and she had no idea the clash that was going to take place. On the right side, we have Shoto Todoroki. A powerhouse that has left the arena frozen time and time again. Midnight announced as the boy jogged into the arena and onto the field but wasn't paid any attention as people were waiting for Midoriya to come out, still affected by his speech and earlier performances. On the left is none other than Izuku Midoriya. The green-haired boy who seemed to capture the attention of almost everyone here and did not want to let go of it. She called as he walked out of the tunnel and onto the floor with a neutral expression, but smiled and waved to her before turning serious again and looking only at Todoroki. Silence for 3 seconds. Go. Instantly ice shot up and Midoriya shot something out of a tube, an explosion of ice and smoke. A few seconds later both boys were standing, but Midoriya was sitting there with a rocket launcher and Todoroki looked frostbitten from his gigantic attack. Midoriya let the weapon drop and, dragged by the strap, Todoroki, finally recovering, sent more ice attacks at him, but each one was met with a rocket. Seemingly, the need to reload was gone. He had figured out how to put ammunition into guns without reloading. Soon, at about 10 feet in front of the ice user, he stopped and dropped the gun, letting it dissolve. You better use your other half now. Midoriya said in a dangerous voice that almost forced the other to use it. There was something that wasn't exactly right with the green-haired boy. Suddenly, without even thinking about it, he threw flames at him. Surprised, he cut it off, but he was still standing there, his shirt now gone, and a small riot shield in front of him. In that one instant of hesitation, Todoroki finally knew why he wasn't considered the strongest. He flew to the edge, only saved by a wall of ice he put up at the last second. His chest hurt, not in the kinda sick way, but the definition of pain. He coughed and dropped to his knees as the other boy walked on him. It's your fucking quirk. Don't you see it? Endeavor is nothing but a selfish acid, but you let him infect you and poison an entire half of you. He screamed, picking the boy up and punched him with brass knuckles this time, causing him to drop to the ground again before blasting him with ice that he easily dodged but was pushed back. Todoroki knew he was right, he knew it. But he refused. You're half-assing it. You're spitting on everyone, using everything they have to get to this point. Stop. It's your quirk, your power, not his, not mine. Yours. Instead of letting yourself be beat because you hate him, prove to him that you're better than him. You're not him. You're Shoto Todoroki. He screamed at the top of his lungs and took a step forward before being blasted away by flames that blasted outward, melting all the ice and clearing Todoroki from frostbite. Not only that, but burned the ever-living hell out of his arms. Midoriya, thank you. The bi-colored hair boy was standing now and had a smile on his face. He felt free, like the shackles he put on himself were now shattered instantly. If Midoriya thought the flames from a second ago were bad, he was mistaken. The sheer heat coming off him was enough for him to create a heat-resistant shield that was being so heat-resistant. He knew he was going to lose, but he was going to make the other use everything he had. He stood up and formed a hand sign as Todoroki started to shoot ice at him while using his other side and heating up the air around them. Domain expansion. Unholy Armory. He yelled, and part of the field turned white as the soldiers piled in front of him with shields, spears, and pikes from all eras and advanced on the ice and fire. Their formation was in a way that should normally keep Midoriya safe and take the least amount of damage before they charged at Todoroki as he raised his hand and flipped his hand upward. All of a sudden, a massive explosion and mist rose from the floor as they waited for it to clear midnight, and Cementos ran down to check on the two. Both were unconscious and looked worse for wear. Clearly the two powerhouses had used everything they had in that one attack. Neither are able to fight. Both are out of the arena. Draw. She called as the stadium erupted, some in displeasure, but some about how powerful they were. We will review the video and see if one left before the other. If so, they will be declared the winner. In the event of a tie, we will host the second tiebreaker of the day. She said as medical bots came in and carted off the boys. No one could see their condition, but from the look on Midnight's face, it wasn't good. Momo, Ida, and Uraraka were there just after they went inside to get healed. No. You'll wait until they're awake, this is going to take time. Recovery girl reprimanded them as she closed and locked the door. Cementos was outside creating a usable floor again, while Midnight was reviewing footage with Eraserhead and Present Mick. All three sighed. They viewed both boys as friends and wished for some way for both of them to win, but had a feeling there wouldn't be a tie. Finally, the floor was repaired and Iida had to go for his match against Shiozaki, but informed them that he would be back by the time they were awake. As he left, the two girls sighed and laughed lightly at his formal way of talking. You know, Midoriya gained a lot of his rescue points from helping me on the exam day. Uraraka said, surprising Momo. He hadn't talked much about that day and she didn't push even if it was a day that he treasured. He stopped the zero-pointer's foot with a spear and got me out. His quirk wasn't as refined as it is now, but he took it on until someone finally came back and brought me to safety. The next thing I know, boom, no more robots. She said as she remembered the day fondly, as he had become her friend that day, and while he was a flirt, she could tell that he really wanted to become a hero for the right reasons, unlike another one of their classmates. He hadn't abandoned her, and she saw no way that he wasn't going to become a hero. She never understood why Bakugo called him a villain or a warmonger. She saw that side of him today though, and it scared her slightly. He only went that far to get through to Todoroki for some reason, and it worked. But now, both boys were injured and were being taken care of. He never really talks about it, but I think that you became his first friend that day. He told me about his middle school and how the kids and teachers there called him out for only being able to summon weapons. They made it seem like he asked for his quirk, calling him a villain and ridiculing him when all he wanted to do was be a hero. She sighed and looked at the zero-gravity girl. He cares so much about his friends. He was sneaking away when he was recovering to try to figure out that domain expansion thing he has. He said that he would never let one of us get hurt as long as he can help it. You didn't see it, but he was fighting the entire time in the USJ to come back to you guys. He protected me even when I was scared. He is what a hero should be. she said, giving the girl her thoughts on her boyfriend. But I do agree, that idiot is such a massive flirt. She told Uraraka so suddenly that neither of them could hold their laughter. The first day of classes we met on the train, and I kept it open for the headphone-wearing, longboarding idiot that we know as Izuku Midoriya. We were talking for a bit before the train stopped suddenly, and I was going to fall. He wrapped an arm around me and had the gall to say, "Hey, looks like you're falling for me already, huh?" she says, throwing her hands in the air as the other girl laughed. "Didn't think you'd remember that. But do you also remember when you said, 'Maybe I am'? And I do have to mention that you whispered that in my ear." A voice with laughter but pain came from the previously closed doorway, and there stood Izuku, granted one that was completely drained from the healing and still had bandages on him that covered burns and cuts from being forcefully flung halfway across the arena. They looked at him in shock, then the clock. They had been talking for nearly 2 hours somehow. Momo rushed him and hugged him tightly but carefully. Uraraka was close behind and hugged her friend. "I love you guys, but please, my ribs," he gasped as they separated, and he looked at them before rubbing the back of my neck. "I lose by a second," he said and looked up at the ceiling before back at them. "It was worth it to have a cute girl and my gorgeous girlfriend hugged me." He laughs as they look at each other before punching him in the shoulders, making him yelp in pain. "I deserved that," he said, rubbing his shoulders before Momo grabbed him and kissed him, leaving him with a dopey smile. "I deserved that too," he smiled as they started walking up to the student stands, Midoriya being stopped multiple times by pros who gave him cards and asked him to visit their agencies. When they finally went to sit, Uraraka noticed that Iida had never come back. "Hey Aoyama," she called as the sparkling boy faced her as she called his name, drawing confused looks from Izuku and Momo, who had wrapped herself around him basically. "Where's Iida? He was supposed to be down there while we waited for Midoriya," she said as the boy nodded. "He answered a phone call and hasn't been back," he said, shaking his head. He had beaten Shiozaki, but Todoroki had beaten him with his ice, as the icy boy came out much earlier than Izuku had. This drew concerned looks from the entire class, as Iida was someone they trusted immensely. He and Midoriya always seemed to be the voice of reason for the class when they were given something that almost seemed like an impossible task. "I'll call him after the festival, but I'll make sure to knock on his door at the dorms to see if he just went back to rest," Midoriya said as the rest of the class nodded and went back to the fights. Midoriya drifted off to sleep. He wasn't as tired as he had built up an impressive amount of stamina, but that didn't mean that he wasn't tired beyond belief. The final match between Bakugo and Todoroki went as well as could be expected. Bakugo yelled for the other to use his flames, and when he hadn't, he unleashed an insanely powerful move that shook Midoriya awake and left him in awe of the pure destruction on the field. Bakugo was soon restrained after attacking Todoroki while he was unconscious and was awarded the first spot, and so on and so forth. However, Midnight did say that Iida had to go home due to a family emergency, which surprised him. From what Iida had been saying was that his family was as healthy as could be. That was until the news came on at the dorms. Breaking news. Ingenium has been attacked by hero killer Stain in Hosu. He has been left paralyzed from the waist down. Is his hero career over? Such a young and promising hero. So far other cases have not been found, however the search for the hero killer will be given the full attention of the Hosu police. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic, link is in the description. See you next time, till then sayonara.